Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Ruggiano, and I want to welcome everybody to Reform Gangsters with my special guest, my good friend Hollywood Wade.
How you doing? Good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you too.
All right, well, another episode of Behind the Gangster here.
Yeah, here we
We've
go.
done 2 on Goodfellas. We've done 1 on the Gotti movie. We're going to keep on with the Gottis, and we're going to go with Pual Castellano because, to me personally, he's a very interesting guy. I know not well respected as far as from the streets, but had good business sense, great business sense. So we're going to do him here today on Behind the Gangster. And I guess we'll start off, you know, he was a street guy. He did take, kind of like Jimmy Burke, and we've talked about in our past episode, he did take a pinch early, got out, didn't say nothing, which kind of boosted his rep in the street. But he really got tied in when he married, what's Carlo Gambino's sister-in-law? Is that what it was?
Well, they were first cousins, so he was always tied in with the mob through the Gambinos and the Castellanos were first cousins. So he married Carlo Gambino's sister, who was his first cousin, and Carlo Gambino married Pual Castellano's sister, who was his first cousin. So they were always all tied in. But his father was a butcher.
Okay.
And he was a butcher when he was a kid. They actually invented, from what I understand, the chicken cutlet.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I like. They had my father told me they had the chicken cutlets with Eds. I mean, they had a big produce business.
Now, one thing I'll say is Pual, from everything that I've read and researched, he did have a great mind for business. What was your personal relationship with Pual? You know, any chance meeting you had with him? Could you pick up on that, or?
Yeah, definitely. He was a businessman. He wasn't a street guy, really.
Right.
He wasn't a gangster. He was dangerous, and he was a killer. He was, he was a businessman. He always owned business, very well, educated, respected. I had a couple of incidents with him. I mean, the first time I personally met him was at my wedding in 1977 when I married my wife, Alice. He came to my wedding. He gave me, a matter of fact, he gave me a wedding card with $500 in it, which was a lot of money in 1977. And he signed it. I remember we were in my basement the next day looking at all the envelopes, and I cut open this envelope, and the money came out, and it said on it, "Love, Pual Castellano." And my father grabbed the card and ripped it up and threw it out. Like, I wish I could have still had it. I probably could have sold it on eBay or something.
I bet you could.
I mean, he signed it like Love, Pual Castellano. And my father ripped it up and threw it out, the card. And that was the first time I met him. The second time I met him was, unfortunately, when one of my brother's friends was murdered in 88th Street Park. We had to sit down in Brooklyn in Jimmy Brown's club, and he was there. I had to sit down, and I met him that time. And I was at Neil's funeral when he didn't show up. I remember that day they were all talking about it. He didn't show up. So I had a couple of incidents with him. My father was close with him. My father did business with him because my father ran the Tapers Union, which was the sheetrock union for the Gambino family, and Pual was big in construction.
Right.
So my father had meetings with him. Tony Lee, my father's partner, hated him because he not abused Tony Lee, but he belittled Tony Lee one night over when my father was in prison. Tony Lee took over the union, and he really never ran the union. He didn't really know much about the union, and Pual sent for Tony Lee, and Tony Lee didn't really have the answers for him because my father ran the union. And Tony Lee said, "Listen, Andy ran the union, not me." And Pual sort of yelled at him, I guess you could say. So Tony Lee never had no use for him. But nobody liked him. Nobody talked good about him.
Well, I mean, why do you think Carlo put him as boss when he passed away? Because we've talked, in past episodes of these shows, everyone probably felt and thought that it should have been Neil. Why do you think he did put Big Pual in that spot?
I think because they were first cousins. I think it had to do with the bloodline. It had to do with how their frame of thought. They thought they were royalty. And I think Carl knew Neil was old school, and I think Carl knew Neil would abide by what Carl's asked because of Carl, like we talked about earlier, about, the boss is the boss. And I think because they were related, and I think he knew that Neil wouldn't go against him and would go by it. Because realistically, everybody thought Neil was going to become the boss. I mean, I know my father told me 100 times that they all got mad with Neil. They all got, like John, my father, Tony Lee, all of them got upset that Neil didn't become the boss because they just thought it was a given.
Now, when he became boss, I mean, didn't he start putting higher taxes on people? I think he raised like a 15% tax on.
Yeah, but when he first became the boss too, he had a lot of money. when he first became the boss, to appease everybody, to be friends with everybody, he was giving out $100,000 loans for a point to any made member of his family that wanted a $100,000 loan. He would give it to them for 1%, which was really giving it to them for free.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So that was that one. I even know a couple of guys that took the 100,000 and put it in the street. I mean, they didn't beat him. They put it in the street and they earned money with it. I mean, if I was a wise guy, I would have took it. I mean, but yeah, then he raised he raised everything. He was money hungry. He was an octopus. It was all about money. But one thing he did do, because he wasn't greedy to a point, because with the Tapers Union, my father was taking care of it for Gambino. He was only getting like $2,000 a month. When Paul became the boss and my father met with them, Paul asked my father how much he was getting, and my father told him, and Paul said, "That's all you get?" And Paul made it more, gave my father more than Carl gave him.
He also dealt a lot with Roy DeMeo and their auto scam. And when that kind of came to a head, DeMeo had an idea that he was probably going to get clipped. I think I seen an interview with his son where he told his son pretty much like, "Hey, I'm going to get killed." And Paul set that up, and I think Nino Gadget was the trigger man on that, if I got my name right.
No. Well, what happened was Nino Gadget was probably one of Paul's main captains. Nino and Tommy Bilotti, of course. But yeah, so well, Sammy the Bull talks about this a lot. As a matter of fact, Sammy just did a thing on that the hit first went. This is according to what Sammy the Bull said. The hit went first to John.
And John passed.
John passed. Then the hit went to Frankie DeChico. Frankie DeChico, but it was supposed to be the three of them, was supposed to be the Gemini twins and Roy DeMeo. The three of them were supposed to get, the contract that first was on the three of them to kill the three through Nino Gadget. Then the hit went to Frankie DeChico. Frankie DeChico went to the Gemini twins and told them if they clipped Roy DeMeo, he could get the contract on them squashed. And he did that. They clipped Roy, and then they got squashed, and then they clipped Nino Gadget. Then Paul had Nino Gadget killed. So Paul was treacherous. I mean, he was a Sicilian guy. He was treacherous.
And that's what I wanted to bring to light, because he's often looked at this, white-collar businessman, but he was ruthless in the sense that he might not have been the guy holding the gun, but he had a lot of triggers pulled under his watch and his
Plenty of
order.
people got killed because of him, on his word. Plenty of people. He was ruthless. Just like the Chin was ruthless. I mean, all of them. You had to be ruthless to become a boss. He became a boss because of Carl, but he was. But to hold on to it, he was going to kill John Gotti.
That was actually the next thing I was going to get into. When those tapes were made, Neil was trying to buffer that out and not give him them tapes, but sooner or later he was going to get those tapes.
Listen, once he sent, and I say this over and over again, once he sent for those tapes and they told him no, someone was going to get killed. And if they did give him the tapes, someone was going to get killed. So if John sacrificed Angelo or his brother, which he would never done because John was a gangster, but someone was going to die over those tapes. And the rumor in the street was, I even heard the rumor was that if they were going to do something after Christmas. And John did it before Christmas. John was a gangster, and John knew that someone had to die. I mean, once he wanted those tapes, that was it.
Yeah, and Paul had already been arrested, and he made bail on the auto
right. And he was on the commission case. He was on two cases.
So we had the two cases later on with the commission. So Paul wasn't exactly sitting pretty himself.
No, he was probably going to go to jail. The commission case, they all went to jail.
Yeah, everybody went to jail. So, had he lived, I'm pretty sure he would have went to jail anyway. But there was some other things that started to come out about Paul. Obviously, people know that he was having an affair, I think, with his maid.
Right.
And due to some health complications, he couldn't.
He had a rod.
Yeah, couldn't perform in certain ways.
And if you listen to and even in the movie, and if you listen to the agents, and in some of these movies, when he found out his house was bugged, he was upset because now the truth was going to come out about his sexual functions, and the maid and his wife found out, and his kids found out that he was having an affair. He was, according to what you read and what you hear, he was crazy about this woman.
Yeah, and like you said, he paid to have some sort of implant to help him out, and that did get leaked out and got around to the light. That couldn't have been a good look.
No, not for the boss. No, definitely not for the boss. No. No, that was not good.
Now, you mentioned earlier he does go in on the commission case. Did he think Roy would have flipped? Because the Roy case happened before the commission. Killing Roy had killed a lot of people. I mean, anybody who's ever read that book, well, I think it's Murder Machine.
Yeah.
I mean, they killed a lot of people in the Gemini Lounge. Did he think Roy was going to flip? Do you think that would have been a possibility?
I don't think so. I think he just thought, Roy was just a psychopath, a serial killer, and that he had to go. I think Nino Gaggi got killed because he figured he could beat the case. With Nino out of the picture, with Roy DeMeo out of the picture, it would make it easier for him to beat that case. So, you got to understand, the mafia is a treacherous life. I mean, years ago, even to backtrack, this guy, Tony Plate, he was on Neil Dellacroce's co-defendant. He blatantly got killed because without him on the case, they dismissed the charges on Neil. He did nothing wrong except get arrested with Neil. It's just treachery. So now here's a guy, he's the boss. He's on trial with Roy DeMeo and Nino Gaggi, and they both got killed. I don't think Paul knew he was going to get killed. He just wanted to beat the case.
Well, and that's the thing is, I think he was, like you said, basically just eliminating anybody that stood any chance of him going to jail. But I think at the same time, John had to be sitting back and saying, look, this is my shot. He's on the commission case. He's took out people here, took out people here. If he gets these tapes, I'm probably dead. My brother's probably dead. Angelo Ruggiero's probably dead. So that was the time to make his move. And I think probably when Neil died, him no showing that funeral was a big deal. Yeah, that was the end of it.
Now John had ammunition to go to people. Go, look, this guy disrespected Neil.
Yeah, exactly.
Now John had ammunition to go to people and say, listen, this guy's got to go. He disrespected Neil. He just did, But Angelo, nobody talks about. Angelo Angelo Ruggiero is really the guy that put that together. He made John the boss. He never gets credit for what he did because of them tapes, because him blabbering on all those tapes. But he was the guy that put it together. He was the guy that went around and put it together for John, Angelo, because he was very well liked and very well respected and very dangerous. He was very tight with my father, too. He used to tell my father everything, but that's another story for another day. But so he put it all together for John.
Now, there's often been a lot, you talked about when his house got bugged, they pretended to have some wiring issues, and the agent went in and was able to put a bug in his, cable issues, and put a bug in his house. Had you ever went to that White House up there? They said that was a massive house.
I never went to his house out there, no. Tony, I never personally went to it, no. Okay. But I remember when he moved out there. I remember when he moved out of the neighborhood and he moved there. Yeah.
It was a big house. The pictures that I've seen, that was a pretty
massive
house.
And after he got arrested, I remember he used to drive around in a van. He used to have this kid drive, and he used to hide in the back of the van, and he would pull up in front of Cafe Liberty, and Tony Lee would get in the van, and he would be sitting in the back of the van, and they would drive around the neighborhood and talk. You couldn't see in the van. It was like a rented van, and he would hide in the back of the van, Angelo. And chain smoked Marlboros, and of course the poor guy died of lung cancer because every time you saw him, he had a cigarette in his mouth.
Well, we mentioned earlier that with the commission case on the rise, nobody else made it out of it, so Paul probably wouldn't either. Hypothetically, if that wasn't going on, where do you think Paul would have took the family, going forward? Say John did not kill him, the commission case wasn't going on. Do you think the Gambinos could have prospered under Paul? Because all things considered, if he could have drove them into using the mob's fear to gain all these construction contracts, I do think there could have been some progress with that. Although he wasn't very liked, I do think he had the mindset to put them into ways to make more money and then get into more legitimate businesses. Where do you think that could have landed?
Yeah, I mean, if there was no tapes and there was no friction, I think he would have took them. Eventually they would have made money. Eventually it would have trickled down because he was a sharp businessman. He was intelligent, and he was about earning money. I mean, and it definitely it would have thrived. It would have thrived. I mean, they were so big, and like you said, with the construction, it would have definitely thrived if things would have fell into place differently than they did. But you got to understand too, there was a lot of stuff going on the down low with the drugs, and he didn't. So there was eventually something may have jumped off because of all the stuff that was going on under the table. You know what I mean, with the drugs and everything, and with the hoodlums in the street. Because he was not a hoodlum. But if if everything, all the cards would have fell right, yeah, they would have thrived. I mean, people made money with him. My father made money with him. I mean, people made money with him.
Well, the cards fell one night at Sparks Steakhouse
Without
for
a
him.
doubt,
And
unfortunately.
who was he supposed to be meeting that night?
Frankie DeChico. That was his guy. That Frankie DeChico blatantly set him up. I mean, he definitely is the Judas. I mean, people say John's not the Judas. John, it was kill or be killed. Frankie DeChico, who I liked, who I knew, he was coming there to meet Frankie. Frankie was one of his main guys. So Frankie DeChico definitely, I mean, I heard from people that when he got out of the car, he went to like literally shake the hands of the people that shot him. Like he saw them and like actually was going to say hello to them and they blasted him. Like that's how, you know.
Because there's been reports that people were in trench coats, like Russian trench coats.
But you know, they were right there.
Yeah.
And that's the gossip that, you know, he was going to actually like say hello to them when they blasted him.
Now, this was it wasn't late at night. It was kind of in the afternoon.
It was mid-afternoon, late afternoon,
Yeah, late afternoon.
It was snowing out.
In broad daylight right there. I've ate at Sparks a couple times. One of the last times I was down here in New York, I ate at it. And I remember the owner, it was another steakhouse. And they were saying, had I known, you know, that hit would have given that guy this much business, I'd have drug him in front of my front door.
Yeah.
You know, but the food is actually very good. So there's
steak
a plug for Sparks Steakhouse. But, I mean, I just thought that was really brazen. Obviously, you know, hits have been committed in daylight before. But that was just very brazen to be on the street right there near Christmas time. Tons of innocent bystanders around. But I guess from a precision and execution standpoint, it went exactly how they wanted it to. Bilotti, you know, wound up being shot dead in the middle of the street.
Bilotti had to go?
Yeah, Bilotti wasn't going to stand by after you just killed one. You had to kill both.
Yeah.
And the way they set it up, 2 people on each side of the street. So you had people coming this side for Bilotti, this side for Paul. Then, of course, John and Sammy apparently sitting right down in a car and shooters at the other end.
There was
in case
a lot of
people
guys
got
on
away.
the block. Yeah, when my father heard about it, he said it was brilliant. I mean, you know, that's the best place. That's the best way to do it. You know, right in front of everybody. You know, in broad daylight. I mean, my father thought it was brilliant. You know, hide in plain sight. You know, to even to go back years and years ago, after Albert Anastasia got killed, my father's crew went on the lam and they were trying to kill Gambino. They actually were trying to kill him in Grand Central Station. I mean, what's more busy than Grand Central Station? So it was just a brilliant plan, and you know, and nobody, you know, was gone. That was it. They were gone. But there was plenty of guys on the street. There was guys there to kill cops. I mean, you know, you had backup against backup against backup. But my father said it was brilliant.
Well, he's been portrayed in, like we said, both Gotti movies that we've talked about in the past. But Chaz Palminteri did play him in a movie called Boss of Bosses, which is more, you know, shot from Paul's vantage point. So it does give you a little different, you know, idea of how it looks, because if people just watch the Gotti movies, you have one impression. I'm not saying I agree with everything the Boss of Bosses did, but obviously Chaz himself's a phenomenal actor. So I recommend everybody and go and check that out. And there's a line, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't remember it exactly, but it's something that they said Paul said, and I'm going off what Michael Francis said on his show. He said, "This life is a wonderful life if you can get away with it. There's just so many ways we can fuck it up."
Without a doubt, yeah, and it's fucked up again. Listen, I told the story 100 times. When I was a kid and I got into this life, my father's partner told me to go to Washington and look at the Justice Department building before you commit to this life, and just realize that that building is going to chase you your whole life. And that's just what they did. They chased me my whole life. And caught me a few times.
Well, I think that'll do it for this episode on Paul Castellano on Behind the Gangster. Anthony, I appreciate it, my friend. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.